A loyal housekeeper finds her life turned upside down when her employer's wife begins to threaten the life of the family matriarch. As the elderly woman's health deteriorates, the housekeeper uncovers a deadly plot that could destroy everything she knows. Determined to save her lady, she takes a bold stand to expose the truth and change the family's destiny. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear. The wrought iron gate creaked softly as Dorothy Fisher crossed the entrance to the Albright mansion, as she did every morning for 15 years. The London morning sun illuminated the perfectly manicured gardens of the Hampstead property, making the dewdrops sparkle on the leaves of the stately oak trees that lined the path to the imposing residence. Dorothy always felt blessed to work there, in that piece of history and elegance that contrasted with her simple life, having come from the East End. The Albright mansion was one of London's most traditional. Built at the turn of the last century, its walls held memories of generations, lavish parties and businesses that shaped part of the city's history. Dorothy adjusted her bag on her shoulder and climbed the steps of the side entrance, the one reserved for staff, her heart warmed by the familiarity of that place which had become her second home. Inside the spacious and bright kitchen, Dorothy found Mrs. Eleanor already seated at the table, enjoying her morning chamomile tea. The family matriarch, at 78 years old, maintained an elegant posture and a welcoming smile that always made Dorothy feel more than just a housekeeper. Eleanor Albright was a woman of resilience, widowed, 10 years prior, who had raised her only son Graham with all the dedication and love a mother could offer. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor," Dorothy said with her usual affection, placing her bag on the counter and tying her apron around her waist. "Good morning, my dear Dorothy," Eleanor replied with that soft voice that carried decades of stories. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a log, Mrs. Eleanor. And you?" Eleanor sighed lightly, stirring her tea with delicate movements. "I had some strange dreams, dear. I dreamed the house was full of people, but I didn't know anyone. I woke up with a heavy heart." Dorothy approached and gently touched her employer's shoulder. "They're just dreams, Mrs. Eleanor. You know that Mr. Graham and I are here to take care of you." Eleanor smiled, but there was a shadow of worry in her clear eyes. "I know, my dear. I know." Dorothy knew that woman better than many members of her own family did. 15 years of daily coexistence had created bonds that transcended the professional relationship. When Dorothy arrived at the mansion, recently moved from Hackney after a difficult separation from a troubled marriage, Eleanor had welcomed her not just as an employee, but as someone who deserved a second chance at life. It was Eleanor who helped her when her mother fell ill, paying all medical expenses without hesitation. It was Eleanor who consoled her when her eldest son decided to pursue a career abroad. That woman was more than an employer. She was a mother whom destiny had presented to her. Graham Albright, Eleanor's only son, was a 42-year-old man, serious and dedicated to the family business. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, neatly combed hair, Graham had inherited Albright Construction from his father, one of London's most respected companies, responsible for erecting some of the most iconic buildings in the West End. Unlike many heirs Dorothy had known throughout her life, Graham was never arrogant or dismissive towards employees. On the contrary, he always treated Dorothy with respect and consideration, even helping her financially when she needed to renovate the house where she lived with her daughter. That morning, as Dorothy prepared the full breakfast, Graham came down the stairs in a hurry, already dressed in an impeccable navy suit. His eyes, however, shone with a different light, something Dorothy hadn't seen in a long time. It was the light of someone in love. "Good morning, Mother." "Good morning, Dorothy," he greeted, kissing Eleanor's forehead before sitting at the table. "Good morning, Mr. Graham," Dorothy replied, serving him a steaming cup of coffee. "You seem cheerful today." Graham smiled, a wide and genuine smile that lit up his usually serious face. "I have good news to share, but I'll wait for dinner tonight to tell you properly." Eleanor looked at her son with maternal curiosity. "You're making me curious, my son." "It will be a good surprise, Mother, I promise." Dorothy watched the scene with a tightening in her heart that she couldn't explain. There was something in the air, a subtle change that she, with her intuition sharpened by years of observation, could sense. She tried to dismiss that uncomfortable feeling and focused on her daily tasks, preparing meals, organizing rooms, and looking after Mrs. Eleanor as she always had. That evening, the dining room table was set with the fine porcelain dinnerware that had belonged to the family for generations. Dorothy had prepared a special dinner at Graham's request: duck confit with chestnut stuffing, fresh leaf salad, and a creme brulee for dessert, Mrs. Eleanor's favorite recipe. The candles were lit, creating a warm and festive atmosphere. When the doorbell rang, Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't explain why, but something inside her constricted. She dried her hands on her apron and went to answer the door, finding Graham accompanied by a woman who immediately captivated all her attention. The woman was stunning, tall, with long black hair that fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, fair skin, and green eyes that shone like emeralds. She wore an elegant red dress that impeccably hugged her curves, and her smile was white and radiant. There was an almost unreal beauty about her, a presence that dominated the room as soon as she entered. "Dorothy, this is Lydia Maxwell, my fiancée," Graham announced with evident pride in his voice. Dorothy's heart skipped a beat. Fiancée? Graham had never mentioned anything about a serious relationship, much less an engagement. She forced a polite smile and greeted the visitor, feeling Lydia's green eyes survey the mansion with an interest that went beyond simple curiosity. "It's a pleasure, Dorothy," Lydia said with a melodious and calculated voice. "Graham has told me so much about you and Mrs. Eleanor. I'm eager to meet the matriarch of this wonderful family." There was something in the way Lydia pronounced her words, something too artificial, too rehearsed. Dorothy led the couple to the dining room, where Eleanor awaited with anticipation. The elderly woman's reaction to seeing Lydia was one of surprise, followed by a polite smile, but Dorothy noticed the hesitation in her employer's eyes. "Mother, this is Lydia, the woman I'm going to marry," Graham said, proudly holding his fiancée's hand. Eleanor slowly rose, leaning on the table, and greeted Lydia with the courtesy her upbringing demanded. But Dorothy, who knew every expression of that woman, noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she shook her future daughter-in-law's hand. During dinner, Lydia charmed Graham with stories of her life, her education in prestigious private schools, her travels through Europe, and her knowledge of art and culture. She spoke with ease about the family business, demonstrating surprising knowledge about Albright construction, ongoing projects, and even the properties the family owned. Graham drank in every word, completely enchanted. Dorothy served the dishes in silence, but her attentive eyes missed no detail. She observed how Lydia admired the paintings on the walls, the antique decorative pieces, the silverware on the sideboard. Her gaze was not one of simple aesthetic appreciation. It was an evaluative, calculating look, as if she were mentally inventorying everything she saw. "This house is magnificent," Lydia commented, delicately running her fingers over the curtain fabric. "How many bedrooms does it have?" "There are 12 bedrooms," Graham replied. "The mansion was built by my grandfather in 1920. It's a historical landmark of the city." "How wonderful," Lydia sighed, her eyes shining with an interest that Dorothy found excessive. "And I imagine the value is considerable." Eleanor coughed lightly, skillfully changing the subject. "And your family, dear Lydia? Graham hasn't told us much about them." For a brief moment, Lydia's smile wavered, but she quickly regained her composure. "My family is from Manchester. My parents passed away a few years ago. I'm an only child, just like Graham. Perhaps that's what brought us closer, this understanding of carrying the family legacy alone." The answer was vague, Dorothy thought, but Graham didn't seem to notice. He was radiant, completely absorbed in his happiness. After dinner, as Dorothy cleared the dishes in the kitchen, Eleanor entered, with slow steps, and sat in one of the chairs, sighing deeply. Dorothy immediately noticed the concern etched on her employer's face. "What did you think of her, Mrs. Eleanor?" Eleanor was silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "She is very beautiful and well-mannered. But Dorothy, there's something I can't explain. When I look into her eyes, I don't see warmth. I see calculation. Dorothy felt a shiver. I also felt something strange, she confessed in a low voice. The way she looked at everything in the house as if she were tallying things up. Eleanor held Dorothy's hand tightly. My son is in love, and I want him to be happy. But a mother feels these things, Dorothy. A mother knows when something isn't right. The two women exchanged a look laden with apprehension. Neither of them imagined that this dinner would mark the beginning of a series of events that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and the love that united that home. The next 3 months passed like a whirlwind. Lydia became a constant presence in the Albright mansion, visiting Graham almost every day, always impeccably dressed, always with that perfect smile that didn't quite reach her green eyes. Dorothy watched everything with growing unease, noticing small details that seemed to go unnoticed by Graham, blinded by the enchantment that woman held over him. One Thursday afternoon, as Dorothy folded clothes in Mrs. Eleanor's room, the matriarch sat in the armchair by the window and sighed deeply. Her face carried an expression of weariness that went beyond the physical. "Dorothy, have you noticed how different Graham is?" Eleanor asked, her voice laden with maternal concern. Dorothy paused her activities and approached her employer. "He's in love, Mrs. Eleanor. It's natural for him to be absent-minded." "But it's more than that," the elderly woman insisted, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "Yesterday he told me he wants to speed up the wedding. 3 months, Dorothy. They've only known each other for 3 months, and he wants to get married next month." Dorothy's heart tightened. "That's very fast." "That's what I told him," Eleanor continued, her eyes welling up. "But Graham told me that when you find the right person, you don't need to wait. That Lydia is the love of his life and he doesn't want to waste time. He's never been impulsive like this, Dorothy, never." Dorothy sat on the arm of the armchair and held Eleanor's hand. "Did you talk to him about your concerns?" "I tried, but he doesn't want to listen. He says I'm being overprotective, that he's finally found someone who understands him, and that I should be happy for him. And I am happy, Dorothy, of course I am, but a mother feels when something isn't right." That same evening during dinner, Graham made the official announcement. The wedding would take place in 6 weeks, an intimate ceremony for close family and friends, followed by a reception in the mansion's gardens. Lydia was radiant beside him, holding his hand with a triumphant gleam in her eyes that Dorothy couldn't ignore. "It will be so special," Lydia said with that melodious voice that Dorothy had learned to distrust. "Graham showed me the gardens, and I imagined how beautiful it will look with white flowers everywhere, an aisle of rose petals, lights strung in the trees. It will be a fairy tale." Eleanor forced a smile. "It's very fast, my son. Are you sure you don't want to wait a little longer, get to know each other better?" Graham kissed his mother's forehead tenderly. "Mother, I'm 42 years old. I know what I want. Lydia is the woman I've always waited for. Please, be happy for us." What could a mother say in the face of such an appeal? Eleanor nodded, swallowing her concerns, but Dorothy saw the tears the elderly woman held back with effort. The weeks leading up to the wedding were frantic. Lydia took charge of all the preparations, transforming the mansion into a hub of constant activity. Florists, decorators, caterers, musicians, all paraded through the property, while Lydia supervised every detail with almost military precision. Dorothy noticed how she moved through the house with growing familiarity, as if she already owned the place, opening cupboards, reorganizing rooms, making decisions without consulting Eleanor. One day, Dorothy found Lydia in Graham's office, leafing through documents on the table. The door was ajar, and Lydia didn't notice her presence. Dorothy watched, hidden in the corridor, as Lydia's fingers traced the papers with voracious interest, her eyes scanning numbers and values. There were construction company contracts, property documents, financial statements. When Lydia finally left the office, Dorothy pretended to be casually passing through the corridor. "Good afternoon, Lydia," Dorothy greeted. Keeping her voice neutral, Lydia started slightly but quickly recomposed her perfect smile. "Good afternoon, Dorothy. I was just looking for Graham. Do you know where he is?" "He went out for a meeting at the construction company. He should only be back tonight." Lydia's eyes gleamed with something Dorothy couldn't decipher. "I see. Well, I'll take the opportunity to sort out some wedding details then." Dorothy waited until Lydia went downstairs before entering the office. The documents were slightly disorganized, as if someone had handled them in a hurry. A chill ran down her spine. Why was Lydia going? Through Graham's papers? What kind of interest was that beyond a fiancé's simple curiosity? That night, Dorothy found Eleanor sitting alone on the veranda, looking at the city lights blinking in the distance. The gentle London night breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden. "Mrs. Eleanor, you're not well," Dorothy said, sitting beside her employer. Eleanor turned to her, and Dorothy saw silent tears streaming down her face. "I'm losing my son, Dorothy. I feel it in my heart." "You're not losing him. Mr. Graham loves you. But she's changing everything, Dorothy. Today Lydia told me that after the wedding she wants to renovate the entire house. She said the decor is outdated, that it needs modernizing. This house holds the memory of my husband, my parents, all our history, and she wants to erase all of it." Dorothy held Eleanor's trembling hands. "Mr. Graham won't allow that." But Eleanor shook her head sadly. "He's so enchanted with her that he would agree to anything. Haven't you seen how he looks at her, as if nothing else in the world exists but that woman?" The wedding day arrived with an impeccable blue sky. The mansion gardens were transformed into a fairy tale setting, exactly as Lydia had imagined. White flowers everywhere, delicate lights strung in the trees, chairs decorated with satin bows. The guests, about 50 people including close family and friends, took their seats as the soft music of a string quartet filled the air. Dorothy helped Eleanor get dressed, adjusting the blue silk dress the matriarch had chosen for the occasion. The elderly woman was pale, her movements slow and tired. "You need to eat something," Dorothy insisted. "You haven't eaten all day." "I have no appetite, my dear. My stomach is churning with nerves." When it was time for the ceremony, Dorothy positioned herself discreetly at the back, observing everything carefully. Graham was elegant in his black tuxedo, his face lit by genuine happiness. And then Lydia appeared, descending the garden staircase in a stunning wedding dress, all French lace, a long train that seemed to float behind her. Her veil partially covered her face, but her green eyes shone with a triumph that Dorothy found disturbing. The ceremony was brief but emotional. Graham had tears in his eyes as he recited his vows, his voice choked with emotion. Lydia spoke with eloquence and grace. But Dorothy noticed that her words, though beautiful, seemed rehearsed, devoid of the true emotion that should accompany such a moment. When the registrar declared them husband and wife, Graham kissed his bride passionately as the guests applauded. Dorothy looked at Eleanor and saw the devastated expression on the elderly woman's face, quickly masked by a forced smile when Graham approached to hug her. "Be happy, my son," Eleanor whispered, her voice failing. "It's all a mother wishes for." The reception that followed was lively, with music, dancing, and abundant food. Lydia moved among the guests like a queen in her kingdom, accepting congratulations and compliments with that smile Dorothy knew so well. But it was during a brief moment, when Lydia thought no one was looking, that Dorothy saw her standing before the mansion, her eyes scanning the facade with an expression of possessive satisfaction that chilled the housekeeper's blood. "Now all this is mine," Dorothy could have sworn she heard Lydia murmur to herself, though she couldn't be absolutely certain. The honeymoon would be short, just a week in Brighton, as Graham couldn't be away from the construction company for too long. When the couple left the next morning, Dorothy and Eleanor were left alone in the mansion, surrounded by the remnants of the previous day's party. "Now all we can do is wait," Eleanor said with a resigned sigh. "Wait and hope that I'm wrong about her." But deep in her heart, Dorothy knew that Eleanor's concerns were not unfounded. There was something in Lydia Maxwell's nature, now Lydia Albright, that foreshadowed storms, and those storms would not be long in coming. The couple returned from their honeymoon on a sunny March afternoon. Dorothy was in the kitchen preparing the welcome dinner when she heard the car pull into the driveway. Graham entered carrying the luggage, his face tanned and relaxed, followed by Lydia, who wore large dark sunglasses and a flowing white dress. She removed her glasses, and her green eyes surveyed the house with an expression Dorothy could only describe as evaluative. "It's wonderful to be back," Graham said, kissing Dorothy's cheek affectionately. "We missed you. The restaurant food was good, but nothing compares to your dishes, Dorothy." Lydia smiled, but said nothing, going straight upstairs towards the bedrooms. Dorothy noticed that she didn't even ask about Mrs. Eleanor, who was resting in her room, after having spent the entire week with joint pains that left her particularly frail. "How is my mother?" Graham asked, concern evident in his voice. "She had a difficult week, Mr. Graham. The pains returned. I called the doctor, and he adjusted her medication, but she's very weak." Graham immediately went upstairs, leaving Dorothy alone in the living room. She returned to the kitchen, but couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort that Lydia's presence brought with it. Something had changed in the atmosphere of the house, as if a shadow had settled over those walls that once knew only peace and harmony. In the following days, Lydia began to implement changes. First, they were small things, a vase repositioned here, a curtain replaced there. But soon the changes became more significant. She hired decorators without consulting Eleanor, had old furniture that had belonged to the family for generations removed, replacing them with modern pieces that completely clashed with the mansion's classic style. Graham, when questioned by his mother, merely smiled and said that Lydia was bringing a fresh air to the house, that it was good to modernize a bit. Eleanor, increasingly frail and dependent on her medication for pain, had no strength to argue. Dorothy saw the sadness in her employer's eyes each time another piece of family history was removed or altered. It was 3 weeks after the honeymoon that the first accident occurred. Dorothy would never forget that Saturday morning. She had woken up earlier than usual, an unsettling premonition disturbing her sleep. She went down to the kitchen to prepare coffee when she heard a scream followed by a terrible crash coming from the main staircase. Her heart pounded. Dorothy dropped everything and ran to the entrance hall, finding a scene that chilled her to the bone. Mrs. Eleanor was lying at the foot of the stairs, her frail body contorted in an unnatural position, groaning in pain. Graham and Lydia emerged from upstairs, both in bathrobes, with expressions of shock. "Mother!" Graham cried, rushing down the stairs and kneeling beside Eleanor. "What happened?" "The stairs," Eleanor moaned, her face contorted in pain. "They were slippery. My feet slid." Dorothy quickly approached, her first aid training kicking in. "Don't move her, Mr. Graham. She might have fractures. I'll call an ambulance." As she dialed, Dorothy looked at the stairs, the morning light streaming through the tall. Windows illuminated the marble steps, and she could clearly see an oily sheen on several of the upper steps. Her heart raced. That wasn't normal. Those steps were religiously cleaned every night before bed, and Dorothy herself had cleaned them the night before. Where had that slippery substance come from? Her eyes met Lydia's, who was standing at the top of the stairs, observing the scene with an expression Dorothy couldn't fully decipher. There was concern there, yes, but also something else, something that made Dorothy's stomach churn. The ambulance arrived quickly and took Eleanor to the hospital. Exams revealed a fractured hip and several bruises. Doctors said she was lucky not to have hit her head. Eleanor would be hospitalized for at least a week for surgery and initial recovery. At the hospital, while Graham spoke with the doctors in the corridor, Dorothy sat beside Eleanor's bed. The elderly woman was under the effect of painkillers, but her eyes were open and lucid. "Dorothy," she called faintly, extending her trembling hand. Dorothy held that hand carefully, feeling the fragility of the bones beneath the thin skin. "I'm here, Mrs. Eleanor." "Those steps," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "They were slippery, as if someone had put oil on them. Did you clean them last night as you always do?" "Yes, Ma'am. With the usual product. I didn't leave any residue." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Then how, Dorothy? How did those steps get like that?" Dorothy had no answer, or rather she had an answer she didn't want to believe, one that seemed too absurd to be true. But the image of Lydia at the top of the stairs, that expression on her face, wouldn't leave her mind. When Eleanor finally returned home after 10 days in the hospital, the mansion seemed different. Lydia had taken advantage of her mother-in-law's absence to make even more changes. The room that had belonged to the late Mr. Albright, kept untouched by Eleanor as a sanctuary to her husband's memory, had been transformed into a luxurious walk-in closet for Lydia. The patriarch's personal belongings, his clothes, his books, his photographs, everything had been packed and stored in the attic. When Eleanor discovered it, her face lost all colour. Graham tried to calm her, saying it was time to move on, that his father wouldn't want to see her trapped in the past. But Dorothy saw Eleanor's heart break at that moment. The elderly woman said nothing, just turned and went to her room, where she remained locked for the rest of the day. Eleanor's recovery was slow and painful. She needed a cane to move around and depended on Dorothy for almost everything. Her medication had been adjusted, several different pills for pain, to strengthen bones, to control blood pressure. Dorothy organized the medicines in a box separated by times, making sure Eleanor took everything correctly. It was on a Tuesday, about 2 weeks after Eleanor's return from the hospital, that the second incident occurred. Dorothy was at the market doing her weekly shopping when she received a frantic call from Graham. "Dorothy, come back immediately. My mother is very ill. Very ill." Dorothy left the shopping cart right there and ran to catch a taxi. When she arrived at the mansion, she found an ambulance at the door. Her heart sank. She rushed upstairs and found paramedics attending to Eleanor, who was pale as a sheet, sweating cold and trembling convulsively. "What happened?" Dorothy asked, desperate. "Severe allergic reaction," one of the paramedics explained. "It seems she took the wrong medication." Wrong medication? But how? Dorothy personally organized Eleanor's medicines every week. She knew every pill, every dosage, every time. At the hospital, after Eleanor was stabilized, doctors explained that she had taken a medication to which she was severely allergic, an anti-inflammatory that was strictly forbidden in her medical history. "But how did this medication get into her medicine box?" Graham asked, confused and worried. Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine. She had organized those medications personally. She was absolutely certain she hadn't put anything wrong, which meant someone had swapped the pills. But who? And why? Her. Suspicions inevitably fell on Lydia. But how to accuse Graham's wife without concrete proof? How to suggest something so terrible without seeming like a paranoid lunatic? When Eleanor returned home again, this time even more debilitated, Dorothy made a decision. She would not tell anyone her suspicions yet, but she would start paying attention to everything. Every move Lydia made, every word, every action. She would protect Mrs. Eleanor, even if it meant watching every corner of that house. One night, Dorothy woke up thirsty and went down to the kitchen. It was 3 in the morning and the house was silent. Passing through the corridor leading to Graham's office, she saw a light on. She approached silently and peeked through the crack in the door. Lydia was there, sitting in Graham's chair, with several documents scattered on the table. She was speaking on the phone in a low voice. "Yes, everything is going as planned," she was saying, her voice devoid of that artificial sweetness she used during the day. "The old woman is getting weaker and weaker. It won't be long now. And Graham suspects nothing. The idiot is so in love he can't see an inch in front of his nose." Dalva held her breath, her heart beating so hard she was afraid of being heard. Lydia continued speaking, mentioning numbers, percentages, company shares. It was clear that she had plans that involved Eleanor's debilitation. When Lydia finally hung up the phone and stood up, Dorothy silently scurried back to her room. Her hands trembled as she sat on the bed, trying to process what she had just heard. Her worst suspicions were being confirmed. Lydia was not just an ambitious and self-serving woman, she was dangerous. And Dorothy needed to find a way to prove it before it was too late. The following days were filled with silent anguish for Dorothy. She carried alone the weight of what she had discovered, unable to share her suspicions without appearing to be causing trouble or acting out of jealousy. Who would believe that Graham's beautiful and well-mannered wife was plotting something sinister against her mother-in-law? Without concrete proof, any accusation would be seen as delusion or envy. Eleanor remained frail, dividing her days between her room and the veranda, where she liked to sit and watch the birds in the garden. Her mobility was severely limited after hip surgery, and the severe allergic reaction to medication had left lingering effects on her immune system. She seemed to age years with each passing week. Dorothy intensified her vigilance. She began waking earlier and going to bed later, always alert to Lydia's movements around the house. She observed how Eleanor's daughter-in-law frequently offered to help with her mother-in-law's medication, how she was always nearby at mealtimes, how her eyes followed the elderly woman's every move, with an attention that seemed to go beyond normal concern. It was on a rainy Thursday that the third incident occurred. Dorothy had prepared lunch as always, a light and healthy meal suitable for Eleanor's dietary needs, grilled chicken with steamed vegetables and brown rice. She served Eleanor first in her room, then prepared plates for Graham and Lydia, who were having lunch in the dining room. 2 hours later, Dorothy heard screams coming from Eleanor's room. She rushed upstairs and found the elderly woman doubled over in pain, vomiting violently, her face contorted in agony. Graham and Lydia arrived shortly after, and once again an ambulance was called. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed severe food poisoning. Tests revealed the presence of harmful bacteria at dangerous levels in Eleanor's system. When questioned about what she had eaten, Dorothy explained the lunch menu. "But this is strange," the doctor commented, frowning. "Did the other members of the household eat the same food?" "Yes, doctor. I prepared everything together myself." "And no one else got sick?" Dorothy felt her stomach churn. "No, doctor. Only Mrs. Eleanor." Graham was visibly shaken. 3 incidents in less than 2 months. His mother, once a relatively healthy woman for her age, was now constantly in and out of the hospital. He held his head in his hands, sitting in the waiting room, while Lydia was beside him, stroking his back in a gesture that seemed more performative than genuine. "Perhaps we should hire a nurse," Lydia suggested softly. "Your mother needs more specialized care. Dorothy does her best, but perhaps it's not enough." Dorothy felt fury rise in her throat. That woman was skillfully planting seeds of doubt, making it seem like the incidents were the result of negligence on her part. Dorothy, who had cared for Eleanor for 15 years without a single problem. "Mrs. Eleanor has always had excellent health under my care," Dorothy said, keeping her voice firm despite the anger boiling inside her. "These incidents only started after Mr. Graham's wedding." The silence that followed was tense. Lydia turned to look at Dorothy, her green eyes shining with something dangerous. "Are you implying something, Dorothy?" "I'm just stating facts," Dorothy replied, holding Lydia's gaze without backing down. Graham stood up, running his hands over his tired face. "Let's stop this. We are all worried about my mother and stressed. Let's not start attacking each other. Dorothy, you're right, my mother has always been well cared for. And Lydia, perhaps you're also right about the nurse. I'll think about it." That night, after Eleanor was released from the hospital with more medication and recommendations for absolute rest, Dorothy stayed awake in her room, thinking. She needed proof. She needed concrete evidence that demonstrated what Lydia was doing. But how could she get it? The answer came unexpectedly. The next morning, as Dorothy was doing her shopping at the market, she met Josephine, an old friend who worked as a housekeeper in another mansion in the neighborhood. Josephine knew everyone and everything that happened in the family homes in the area. "Dorothy, my dear, how are you?" Josephine asked, hugging her friend affectionately. The two sat down for coffee at the small bar in front of the market, and Dorothy, desperately needing to talk to someone, told her everything that was happening. Josephine listened attentively, her eyes widening more and more as the story unfolded. "This Lydia, is she really from Manchester?" Josephine asked when Dorothy finished. "That's what she says. Why?" Josephine stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Because I could have sworn I've seen this woman before. Not here in London, but in a television report about 2 years ago. There was a very similar woman involved, in a scandal with a rich man in Birmingham. The man was a widower, married her, and a few months later suffered a suspicious domestic accident. He survived, but was left debilitated. When the family started investigating, they discovered she had forged documents to transfer properties into her name." Dorothy's blood ran cold. "Are you sure?" "Not absolutely," Josephine admitted, "but the resemblance is striking. The woman used another name, of course. Let me try to remember. It was a different name, something like Laura or Mary. The report didn't go into much detail because the case was hushed up by the man's family. They didn't want a public scandal." Would you be able to find that report? Josephine thought for a moment. I can try. I have a niece who works at a news agency. She might have access to the archives, but it will take a few days. Please, Josephine, it's urgent. Mrs. Eleanor's life might be in danger. The two friends said goodbye with Josephine's promise to do her best to find information. Dorothy returned to the mansion with a mix of hope and apprehension. If her suspicions were correct, Lydia was not just an ambitious woman, but an experienced con artist with a history of manipulation and fraud. Meanwhile, at the mansion, things continued to deteriorate. Lydia had convinced Graham to begin structural renovations on the house, under the excuse that they needed to modernize the electrical wiring and plumbing. Workers began to circulate around the property, breaking down walls, removing old floors. The constant noise prevented Eleanor from resting properly, and the dust from the renovations aggravated her respiratory problems. Dorothy also noticed that Lydia had started to get more actively involved in the construction company's business. She accompanied Graham to the office, participated in meetings, made suggestions about contracts and projects. Graham, still completely enchanted by his wife, seemed proud of her interest in the family business. One afternoon, as Dorothy helped Eleanor take a bath, the elderly woman gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Dorothy, I know what's happening," Eleanor whispered, her voice weak but determined. Dorothy stopped what she was doing and looked into her employer's eyes. "You know? That woman is trying to harm me. I don't know exactly how, but I feel it, and the worst part is that my son can't see it. He's blind because of her." Tears began to stream down Eleanor's face. "I'm scared, Dorothy. Scared of what she's capable of. Scared of leaving my son alone with her. Scared that when I'm no longer here, she'll destroy everything we've built." Dorothy carefully embraced her employer, feeling the fragility of that body that had once been strong and vibrant. "You're not going anywhere, Mrs. Eleanor. I will protect you. I promise." "But how? How can you protect me from someone who lives under the same roof, who has my son's trust?" "I'll find a way," Dorothy promised, though she didn't yet know exactly how she would. Keep that promise. That night, Dorothy made a decision. She needed visual proof. The next day, she used some of her savings to buy small, discreet security cameras at an electronics store in the city center. The salesman helped her choose models that could be easily hidden and recorded in high definition. Over the next few days, Dorothy carefully installed the cameras in strategic points around the house. One in the hallway near Eleanor's room, another in the kitchen, a third disguised in a flower vase in the living room. The cameras had motion sensors and recorded automatically when they detected activity. Dorothy also began to document everything in writing. Each incident, each suspicious behavior of Lydia's, each change in Eleanor's health. She created a detailed file with dates, times, and precise descriptions of the events. It was on a Monday morning, while reviewing the footage from the kitchen camera, that Dorothy found something disturbing. The footage showed Lydia entering the kitchen at 3 in the morning, when everyone was asleep. She opened the refrigerator, took out the container with the food Dorothy had prepared specifically for Eleanor, and added something from a small vial she carried in her bathrobe pocket. Then she stirred the food well to disguise it and put everything back. Dorothy's heart pounded. There was the proof that Lydia was indeed tampering with Eleanor's food. But what was she putting in it? Poison? Bacteria? Something to cause symptoms of intoxication? Dorothy saved the video to multiple devices, making sure to have backup copies. But it wasn't enough yet. She needed more evidence. She needed to understand the extent of Lydia's plans before exposing her. The wait, however, was becoming increasingly dangerous. With each passing day, Eleanor became weaker, more dependent, more vulnerable. And Lydia, feeling safe and invincible, was becoming bolder in her actions. Josephine's call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Dorothy was at the supermarket when her phone rang, and she almost dropped her shopping basket when she heard her friend's excited voice on the other end of the line. "Dorothy, I found it. My niece managed to access the station's archives." Dorothy's heart pounded. "And? Was it her?" "It's absolutely the same woman. The name she used was Laura Vance. She married a widowed businessman from Birmingham, owner of a hotel chain. 4 months after the marriage, the man suffered a series of mysterious domestic accidents, Falls, intoxications, problems with medication, all very similar to what you told me about Mrs. Eleanor. Dorothy felt her legs weaken. She found a quiet corner of the market to continue the conversation. What else did you find out? The man's family began to suspect and hired private investigators. They discovered that Laura, or Lydia, had a history. She had done this before in Manchester with another rich man. Always the same pattern. Seduces a successful man, marries quickly, begins to debilitate family members who might inherit, and manipulates documents to transfer properties into her name. And was she arrested? Josephine sighed. No. The Birmingham businessman's family preferred to resolve everything discreetly. They expelled her and made an agreement where she would return what she had stolen in exchange for not publicly reporting her. They wanted to avoid scandal. But there's more. My niece managed to send me copies of some documents from the case. I'll email them to you now. Dorothy thanked her effusively and hung up. Her hands trembled as she tried to process that information. Lydia was a professional con artist, a woman who made this her way of life. And now she had her claws firmly planted in the Albright family. Upon arriving home, Dorothy went straight to her room and opened Josephine's email on her old laptop. There were the documents, archived reports, photos of Lydia under another name alongside different rich men. There was even a private investigation report detailing her previous scams. The pattern was always the same, chillingly similar to what was happening with Eleanor. Dorothy printed everything, organized it into a folder, and hid it in her wardrobe. Now she had documentary proof of Lydia's criminal past. But she still needed concrete evidence of what she was currently doing in the Albright mansion. It took 5 more days of constant surveillance and recordings before Dorothy got what she needed. The cameras captured Lydia on multiple occasions, tampering with food, swapping medications, and even, one morning, rubbing something on the steps of the secondary staircase that Eleanor used to go down to the garden. But it was on a Thursday, the day Graham travelled to Manchester on business, that Dorothy witnessed something that chilled her blood. She was in her room when she heard screams coming from the pool area. She ran to the window and saw a scene that paralyzed her with horror. Lydia was by the pool with Eleanor. The elderly woman in her wheelchair, which she used on days of greater pain, was dangerously close to the water, and Lydia, with her hands on the chair's armrests, seemed to be pushing. Dorothy didn't think twice. She ran out of the room, hurried down the stairs faster than she ever had, crossing the garden, screaming, "Help! Stop! What are you doing?" Lydia started and quickly moved away from the wheelchair. When Dorothy arrived, breathless, she found Eleanor pale and trembling, tears streaming down her face. The chair was just inches from the edge of the pool. "What's going on here?" Dorothy demanded, positioning herself between Lydia and Eleanor. Lydia quickly recomposed her mask of innocence. "I was just helping Mrs. Eleanor get some air. She asked to come see the garden. The chair's wheels got stuck and I was trying to unstick them when you came screaming and startled me." "Liar!" Eleanor's weak but firm voice cut through the air. "She was pushing me. She was going to throw me in the pool." Lydia laughed, but there was venom in that sound. "Mrs. Eleanor, you're confused again. It's the medication. I would never do such a thing." Dorothy observed Eleanor, saw the genuine terror in her eyes, and made her decision. "I saw everything from my bedroom window," Dorothy lied, looking Lydia directly in the eyes. "I saw you pushing the chair towards the water." Lydia's face hardened for a fraction of a second before the fake smile returned. "You're delusional, Dorothy, just like poor Mrs. Eleanor. Perhaps you both need psychiatric help." Dorothy didn't reply. She simply took Eleanor's wheelchair and wheeled her back into the house, her heart pounding. That had been an explicit attempt to seriously harm Eleanor, perhaps even to cause something irreversible. Lydia was becoming desperate and reckless. That night, after ensuring Eleanor was safe in her room with the door locked, Dorothy reviewed the camera footage. Her luck was changing. The camera she had installed disguised in a garden ornament had captured everything. The image clearly showed Lydia pushing Eleanor's chair towards the pool. There was no room for alternative interpretations. Dorothy saved the file, made multiple copies. Now she had everything she needed: recordings of Lydia tampering with food and medication, documents proving her criminal past under another name, and the video of the attempt at the pool. It was time to act. But there was a problem. Graham was completely blinded by the love he felt for Lydia. How could she make him see the truth? How could she break the spell that woman had cast upon him? The answer came unexpectedly. The next morning, Dorothy received a visit from Richard Taylor, the Albright family lawyer for over 20 years. The grey-haired man with thin-rimmed glasses looked worried. "Dorothy, I need to speak with Mrs. Eleanor. It's urgent." Dorothy led him to her employer's room. Richard sat beside Eleanor's bed and opened his document folder. "Mrs. Eleanor, I needed to confirm something with you. I received a document from the registry office requesting the registration of a transfer of shares in the construction company. According to the papers, you would be transferring 30% of your shares to Lydia Albright." Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. "What? I never did that. I never signed anything like that." Richard nodded gravely. "That's what I suspected. The signature on the documents is very similar to yours, but there are small inconsistencies that caught my attention. Someone forged your signature, Mrs. Eleanor. And, according to the documents, this transfer would give Lydia de facto control over the company. As combined with Graham's 40%, they would have 70% of the total." Dorothy felt fury explode in her chest. That was it. That was the missing proof. Lydia was not just trying to debilitate Eleanor, she was also stealing the family business. "There's more," Richard continued, taking other papers from the folder. "I did some investigating on my own because something about this woman bothered me since the wedding. I discovered that the name Lydia Maxwell is false. Or rather, it's one of several names she uses. I found a history of fraud and marital scams in 3 different counties." Dorothy and Richard exchanged a meaningful glance. It was time to gather all the evidence and confront Lydia. But they needed to do it the right way, ensuring Graham saw the truth with his own eyes. "Mr. Richard, I have more evidence," Dorothy said, going to fetch her hidden folder from the wardrobe. "Much more." She showed the lawyer everything she had collected, the security camera videos, the documents Josephine had obtained, the detailed record of all incidents. Richard examined everything with growing attention, his face becoming increasingly serious. "Dorothy, this is extremely serious. We have enough evidence here for a formal complaint. We need to call the police." But Dorothy shook her head. "First, we need to show everything to Mr. Graham. He needs to see with his own eyes who he really married. If we call the police now, Lydia might have time to destroy evidence or flee." Richard thought for a moment and agreed. "You're right. I'll call Graham now and ask him to return immediately from Manchester. I'll say it's a business-related emergency. When he arrives, we'll show him everything." That afternoon, while awaiting Graham's return, Dorothy remained on constant alert. Lydia seemed restless, moving around the house with a nervousness she couldn't completely disguise. Perhaps she had realized that Richard had discovered the forgery. Perhaps she knew her time was running out. Graham arrived in the late afternoon, entering through the door with a worried expression. Richard awaited him in the office, with Dorothy and Eleanor also present. Lydia tried to enter, but Richard politely but firmly asked her to wait in the living room. "What's going on?" Graham asked, looking at everyone with confusion. "Richard, you said—" "It was urgent." "It is urgent, Graham, and what I have to show you will change everything you think you know about your wife." The silence in the office was thick, heavy as lead. Graham looked at the lawyer with a mixture of confusion and irritation, clearly bothered by being pulled from his business trip for this mysterious meeting. "Richard, what are you talking about? What does my wife have to do with this?" Richard took a deep breath and opened the folder on the table. "Graham, I need you to look at these documents very carefully. I found serious irregularities related to the construction company's shares." He placed the papers of the alleged share transfer before Graham, who examined them with a furrowed brow. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "This says my mother is transferring 30% of her shares to Lydia, but this doesn't make sense. My mother never mentioned anything about this." "Because I never did that," Eleanor's weak but determined voice echoed from the chair where she was sitting. "I never signed these documents, my son. That's not my signature." Graham picked up the papers and examined the signature more closely. Dorothy could see the conflict on his face, the battle between what his eyes saw and what his heart wanted to believe. "There must be a mistake," he said, but his voice was wavering. "Perhaps some error at the registry office." Richard shook his head. "It's not a mistake, Graham, it's forgery, and there's more, much more." The lawyer then began to present the complete dossier. The documents Josephine had obtained, showing that Lydia had used other names in other counties, that she had a history of marital scams. Graham leafed through the papers with trembling hands, his face losing color with each page. "This has to be a coincidence. It has to be someone else who looks like her." It was then that Dorothy stepped forward, holding her tablet. "Mr. Graham, I have something you need to see." With trembling fingers, she played the first video. The kitchen recording showing Lydia at 3 in the morning tampering with Eleanor's food. Graham watched in silence, his jaw tightening. "There's more," Dorothy said, moving to the next video. This one showed Lydia swapping medications in Eleanor's medicine box. "And more," Dorothy continued, playing the recording of Lydia rubbing a slippery substance on the staircase steps. Graham was visibly shaken, leaning on the table as if his legs could no longer support him alone. "No, it can't be true. There has to be an explanation." Dorothy took a deep breath before playing the last video, the most devastating of all. The garden recording showing Lydia deliberately pushing Eleanor's wheelchair towards the pool. The cry that escaped Graham was one of pure anguish. "No, this can't be happening." He turned to his mother, tears streaming down his face. "Mother, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I was a blind fool." Eleanor extended her trembling hand to her son. "You were in love, my dear. She's very skilled at what she does." Graham covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "All this time. She was trying to harm you all this time, and I didn't see it. I defended her. I doubted you, Mother. I doubted Dorothy." He turned to Dorothy with red, swollen eyes. "You tried to warn me. You tried to make me see, and I wouldn't listen. Forgive me, Dorothy." Dorothy felt her own tears begin to fall. "The important thing now is to protect Mrs. Eleanor and hold Lydia accountable for what she did." Richard intervened, his voice professional but gentle. "Graham, we have enough evidence here for a formal complaint. Fraud, forgery of documents, repeated attempts to cause serious physical harm. But we need to act carefully and strategically." Graham wiped his face with the back of his hands, trying to regain his composure. "What do we need to do?" Richard had already thought of everything. "First, we need to get Lydia to incriminate herself definitively. The evidence we have is strong, but it would be even better if we could get a recorded confession. Second, we need to ensure she doesn't destroy evidence or try to flee when she realizes she's been discovered." Dorothy had an idea. "I could get her to confess. If I confronted her when Mr. Graham was nearby listening, perhaps she would feel secure enough to admit everything." Graham looked at Dorothy with concern. "It would be dangerous. If she realizes it's a trap, she could become violent." But Dorothy was determined. "Mrs. Eleanor has been in danger all these months. It's time to turn the tables." After much discussion, they devised a plan. Graham would pretend to know nothing and leave the house with some excuse. Dorothy would then confront Lydia in the garden, a place where Graham could hide and hear everything, while a mobile phone camera recorded the conversation. Richard would stay in the house, ready to call the police at the right moment. The plan was put into action the next morning. Graham left the house claiming to have an urgent meeting at the construction company, kissing Lydia and saying he would be back that evening. As soon as he left, Dorothy saw Lydia visibly relax, her fake smile giving way to an expression of calculating satisfaction. Dorothy waited until mid-afternoon, when she knew Lydia would be in the garden making her private calls, as she usually did. She took a deep breath, put the recording mobile phone in her apron pocket, and went to meet the woman who had tormented her family for months. Lydia was sitting on one of the garden benches, speaking on the phone in a low voice. When she saw Dorothy approaching, she quickly ended the call. "Do you need something, Dorothy?" Her voice had that dismissive tone she no longer bothered to hide when Graham wasn't around. Dorothy stopped a few feet away, maintaining an upright posture. I need to talk to you about what you're doing to Mrs. Eleanor. Lydia laughed, a cold, unpleasant sound. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm taking care of my mother-in-law, just like a good daughter-in-law should. Taking care, you're trying to harm her. I saw you tampering with her food. I saw you swapping her medications. I saw you trying to push her into the pool. Lydia's smile vanished, replaced by a hard, menacing expression. Be careful what you say, Dorothy. Those are serious accusations you can't prove. I can, Dorothy replied, keeping her voice firm despite the fear she felt. I have proof of everything, recordings, documents. I know about Laura Vance. I know about your other scams in Manchester and Birmingham. Lydia's face paled for an instant before she regained her composure. Her green eyes shone with fury. You don't know anything. And even if you did, who would believe you? A simple housekeeper against Graham Albright's wife. Graham would believe, Dorothy said. When I show him everything. Lydia rose from the bench, approaching Dorothy with slow, calculated steps, like a predator stalking its prey. You think Graham will believe you? He's completely under my control. That idiot would do anything I asked. Dorothy felt anger boil in her veins. He's not an idiot. He's a good man who was deceived by a professional con artist. Lydia gave a bitter laugh. Good? He's pathetic. So desperate for love that he didn't realize I only wanted his money, the company, the properties, all of this that should be mine by right. And Mrs. Eleanor? Why harm her? What did she do to deserve this? Lydia's eyes gleamed with cruelty. That old woman was in the way. 60% of the company in the hands of a weak, sick woman. It was a waste. I deserved those shares much more than she did, and if she suffered a few accidents along the way, well, these things happen to old people. You're monstrous, Dorothy whispered, disgusted. I'm clever, Lydia corrected. I've been doing this for years and I always come out on top. Rich, lonely men are so easy to manipulate. Graham was just another one on the list. And you know what's funnier? Even if you tell him everything, even if you show him your supposed proofs, he won't want to believe it. His love for me is too strong. It was at that moment that Graham emerged from behind the trees where he had been hiding. His face was pale, marked by pain and betrayal, but there was determination in his eyes. You're wrong, Lydia, or should I call you Laura? I believe every word Dorothy said. I saw all the evidence, and I heard your confession just now. Lydia's face lost all color. She looked from Graham to Dorothy and back to Graham, realizing too late that she had fallen into a trap. Graham, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. I was just joking, testing Dorothy's loyalty. Stop. Graham's voice was hard as steel. Stop lying. It's over, Lydia. Your game is over. At that moment, Richard appeared on the house's veranda, followed by 2 police officers. Lydia looked around like a cornered animal, searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. What happened next was a whirlwind. Lydia tried to flee, but the police easily caught her. She screamed, cried, begged, alternating between desperate pleas and furious threats, but none of that mattered anymore. The evidence was irrefutable. Her perfect mask had finally fallen, revealing the true nature of the woman behind it. The next 3 months were a period of recovery and rebuilding for the Albright family. Lydia's arrest had been news in all the London newspapers, a scandal that exposed not only her actions against Eleanor and Graham, but her entire history of scams and frauds in different counties. The police investigation, armed with all the evidence Dorothy had meticulously collected, revealed a much larger network than anyone imagined. Lydia Maxwell or Laura Vance or Mary Stone, all false names she had used over the years, had at least 7 known victims. Rich men, widowers, or successful bachelors whom she seduced quickly married and then began to drain their fortunes through forgeries, manipulations, and, in more serious cases, attempts to cause physical harm to accelerate inheritances. The trial was swift, considering the overwhelming amount of evidence. Dorothy's recordings, combined with the testimonies of Richard, Eleanor, and even some of the previous victims who finally had the courage to come forward, sealed Lydia's fate. She was sentenced to 60 years in prison for multiple charges that included fraud, forgery of documents, attempts to cause serious bodily harm, and domestic violence. During the trial, Lydia tried various strategies, First, she denied everything, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy. Then, she tried to portray herself as a victim, alleging she suffered from psychological problems that led her to act that way. Finally, when she realized nothing would work, she simply fell silent, sitting in the defendant's box with an empty expression, as if none of it mattered. Graham was present at all hearings, but Dorothy noticed how each session left him more devastated. It was not easy for him to accept that the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman with whom he had dreamed of building a life, had never truly existed. She was merely a carefully constructed mask to deceive him. One evening, weeks after the final verdict, Graham sought Dorothy in the kitchen. She was preparing chamomile tea for Eleanor, who was finally recovering her health with the end of the constant sabotages. Graham sat at the table, his face bearing the marks of pain and the forced maturation from recent events. "Dorothy," he began, his voice hesitant, "I will never be able to thank you enough for what you did. You saved my mother. You saved our family, and I was a blind fool who refused to see the truth." Dorothy placed the teacup on the table and sat beside him. "You were in love. Lydia was very skilled at what she did. She deceived many men before you. But you saw through her from the beginning, didn't you?" Graham looked at Dorothy with genuine admiration. "You realized something was wrong." Dorothy nodded. "I can't explain it properly. It was an intuition, something in the way she looked at things, as if everything was an object to be evaluated and acquired. But, Mr. Graham, you have a good heart. That's why she was able to deceive you. Good people expect goodness from others." Graham wiped his eyes, which were starting to tear up. "My mother could have been seriously harmed because of me. Something irreversible could have happened, and it would be my fault for bringing that woman into our home." "But it didn't happen," Dorothy said firmly. "Mrs. Eleanor is recovering. She's stronger every day, and you've learned that not everyone who smiles has good intentions." Richard Taylor, the lawyer, was instrumental in dismantling all the frauds Lydia had committed. The forged documents were invalidated, the share transfers reversed, and everything that had been stolen or manipulated was restored to its original state. Albright Construction remained secure, with Eleanor retaining her 60% and Graham his 40%, as it had always been. But Richard didn't stop there. He also made sure that Lydia's previous victims had their cases reopened and reevaluated. Several of them managed to recover at least part of what had been stolen, and all expressed gratitude for Dorothy's courage in exposing the con artist. Eleanor's recovery was remarkable. Without Lydia's constant sabotages, her health improved dramatically. The fractured hip healed properly with regular physiotherapy. Joint pains diminished with the correct medication that was no longer tampered with, and her energy gradually returned. On a sunny June afternoon, Dorothy found Eleanor in the garden, sitting in her favorite chair, feeding the birds that came to visit the fragrant flowers. The elderly woman had color in her face, a genuine smile on her lips, and that sparkle in her eyes that Dorothy hadn't seen in months. "Dorothy, my dear, come sit with me," Eleanor called, gesturing to the chair beside her. Dorothy approached and sat down, enjoying the gentle breeze that carried the scent of jasmine. "It's so good to see you like this, Mrs. Eleanor. Back to life." Eleanor held Dorothy's hand with surprising strength for someone who had been so frail recently. "I'm alive because of you, Dorothy. You risked everything to protect me. You could have lost your job. You could have been accused of causing trouble. But you persisted because you knew something was wrong. I couldn't let her harm you. You are my family, Mrs. Eleanor. And you are mine, my dear, more than many blood relatives could be. That's why Graham and I made a decision." Eleanor gestured, and Graham appeared on the veranda carrying some documents. He approached with a warm smile and sat on the other side of Dorothy. "Dorothy," Graham began, "my mother and I have talked a lot in recent weeks about family, about loyalty, about what really matters in life, and we came to the conclusion that you deserve much more than a simple thank you." He placed the documents on Dorothy's lap, who looked at them with confusion. "What is this?" "These are documents from the construction company," Eleanor explained with pride in her voice. "We are transferring 10% of my shares to you, Dorothy. You are now officially a partner in Albright Construction." Dorothy felt tears well up instantly. "No, I can't accept. It's too much." "You can, and you will accept," Graham said gently. "In addition, we renovated the house in the hamlet where you were born. The one you mentioned needed repairs, but you never had enough money to renovate. It's now completely renovated, ready for you and your daughter, or for you to rent out and have extra income, whichever you prefer." Dorothy covered her face with her hands, sobbing. It wasn't just the material generosity that moved her, but the recognition, the validation that her courage and loyalty had meant something profound to those people she loved as family. "This is not charity," Eleanor continued. "It's what you deserve. It's what's fair. You saved us, Dorothy. You saved our lives and our legacy, and we want you to be officially part of that legacy." The following months brought a new and happier routine. Dorothy continued to live in the mansion, now not just as a housekeeper, but as a genuine member of the family and a company partner. She participated in meetings, offered opinions on projects, and discovered she had a natural talent for administrative aspects of the business. Graham, for his part, underwent a profound transformation. Lydia's betrayal had hurt him deeply, but it had also taught him valuable lessons about seeing beyond appearances, about trusting those who truly deserve trust, and about valuing the people who had always been by his side. He became closer to his mother, more attentive to the feelings of others, and more grateful for the true blessings in his life. The Albright mansion once again became a place of peace. Eleanor redecorated some of the rooms Lydia had changed, restoring family memories and traditions. The room that had been transformed into a closet reverted to being the sanctuary dedicated to the memory of Mr. Albright, with his photographs, his books, and his personal belongings carefully reorganized. A year after Lydia's conviction, the Albright family organized a small celebration. It wasn't anyone's birthday. It wasn't any special calendar date. It was simply a celebration of life, family, and overcoming adversity. In the garden illuminated by soft lights, Graham raised a toast. "To family," he said, lifting his glass. "Not just the one born of blood, but the one we build with love, loyalty, and trust. To my mother, who is the strongest woman I know, and to Dorothy, who is much more than any title could describe. She is our guardian, our friend, our sister, our family." Everyone toasted, the clinking of glasses echoing in the London night. Dorothy looked around at that garden where so many terrible things had almost happened and saw only beauty and renewal. The flowers were more vibrant than ever. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the faces of the people she loved were illuminated by genuine smiles. In the months that followed, the Albright story became known not for the scandal, but for the lesson it taught. Dorothy was invited to give talks on domestic vigilance and elder protection. Her account of courage and persistence inspired many others in similar situations to speak up, to not ignore their instincts, to protect those they loved. Albright Construction prospered under the new joint administration. Graham brought vision and experience, Eleanor wisdom and historical knowledge, and Dorothy a practical and human perspective that perfectly complemented the team. Together, they transformed the company into something even greater, not just in financial terms, but in terms of social responsibility, creating programs for employees and their families. On a spring morning, 2 years after Lydia's conviction, Dorothy woke up and went to the balcony of her new room, now no longer the maid's quarters, but one of the main bedrooms of the mansion. From there she could see the entire garden, the pool that now brought only memories of overcoming, and the London Eye in the distance, its arms open over the wonderful city. She thought of everything that had happened, how her life had completely changed, but above all she thought of how the courage to do what was right, even when difficult, even when frightening, had made all the difference, not just for her, but for everyone she loved. Eleanor appeared beside her, leaning slightly on her cane, but with firm, confident steps. "Thinking about life, my dear?" Dorothy smiled. "Thinking about how grateful I am for everything, for this family, for this second chance, for finding the courage to protect those I love." Eleanor embraced Dorothy tenderly. "The courage was always in you, Dorothy. You just needed a reason to let it shine. And what a blessing it was for us that you found it. And so in the Albright mansion in Hampstead, life continued. Not perfect, because life never is, but full of true love, mutual respect, and the certainty that family is not defined only by blood ties, but by the bonds we choose to create and nurture. Lydia had tried to destroy everything, but in the end she only strengthened the bonds that truly mattered. Graham would eventually find love again, but this time with wisdom and caution, gradually introducing any new person in his life to his mother and to Dorothy, valuing their opinions and instincts. Eleanor would live many more years, happy and surrounded by those who genuinely cared for her. And Dorothy, the humble housekeeper who became a hero and then a partner and family member, would continue to be the silent but unwavering force that held everyone together. The story of how an ordinary woman with an extraordinary heart saved an entire family from a predator disguised as an enchanted princess became a legend in the neighborhood. People spoke with admiration of Dorothy Fisher, the woman who did not let ambition and wickedness destroy what was sacred. And whenever someone asked Dorothy how she found the courage to face Lydia, she would simply reply, "Love is stronger than fear. When you truly love someone, you find strengths you didn't even know you had. It was love that made me fight, and it was love that won in the end." Dear listeners, we hope the story of Dorothy and the Albright family has touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us that true family is built with love, loyalty, and the courage to protect those we love. If this story moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell icon so you don't miss any of our stories. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and tell us in the comments what part touched you the most. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of life, love, and human relationships. For more stories like this, click on the special playlist we've prepared here on the side. Your participation in the comments is very important to us. Share your impressions, your similar stories, and be part of this community that values good narratives. Until the next story, and remember, courage and true love always win in the end.